circumstance, the problem is that nowadays, mostly in a time where information is so quick, so important, it's too much information coming from many different sites. Instead of helping us to understand the reality, sometimes it's confusing. It's confusing, and moreover, it's confusing when it's like a need to analyze everything on an immediate basis. So something is happening in the morning, in the evening, there are hundreds of articles talking about this issue, trying to solve it out and explain why this has happened and what could be the consequences. And looks like that tomorrow this is over and we are talking about another thing. This is already the past. No one is interested anymore. So we are working in this modus operandi that it is not an absolute, so it's not the result of a reflection and deep knowledge of the roots and the causes of these problems. And unfortunately, this could be happening with the Mediterranean issues. So this is why a space like this, 2 days, with so many different areas in which you are focusing attention, a couple of hours with very expert people that could be able to explain you with more in detail without looking at the newspaper, without looking at the Twitter, what is saying about what is happening right now, could be helpful to avoid this kind of not very in-depth analysis. So we are living a humanitarian crisis, as you know. We are living conflicts, and of course, these things, these events need immediate reactions, but also need an analysis that could be more far from this need to provide an immediate result. So we need to understand why, we need to understand how, and we need to learn how to focus. So this is a broad perspective, including the vision of in the areas of humanities, journalism, or history, could be also very useful for the debate and for the helping the public reaction. This seminar from us also is bringing an added value, which is the interchange between the different actors and inside the academia. And this is something that from the government of Catalonia we are absolutely keen on supporting. The different Catalan actors, research actors that are working in the Mediterranean issues, to boost the knowledge in this absolutely necessary, because Mediterranean is also our home, is our natural space in which we are living, and we need to develop an external action absolutely coherent and open with this with the Mediterranean. We are very pleased also to be here today, because also activities like this seminar are absolutely aligned with our external politics towards Europe, but also focusing in the Mediterranean. Europe is promoting a vision of the promotion of innovation and research and the values of knowledge and academic exchange. Promoting many of their different programs, as you know. Last July, for example, in the Interministerial Research Conference in Malta, there are certain priorities that were focused, and one of them, for example, immigration, which is one of the hot topics of the Mediterranean. So many of the programs that Europe is putting available are currently used for working for the Mediterranean issues with this perspective. And we are supporting programs like, for example, you may have heard about the Prima project, which is a new project that has established, the new program, sorry, that has established Secretariat here in Barcelona to promote research and innovation in different sectors like the water and agro-food industry in the Mediterranean. So these dynamics that they are promoted by European programs are very interesting from us to be used to support this Mediterranean research job that you are leading. And we believe that there is still room to improve and still room to find agreements and find new lines of cooperation between universities and research centers throughout the Mediterranean, promoting exchanges, promoting academic mobility, and many other ways of cooperation. Another area in which it is in this seminar, it's absolutely also focus is the youth, jobs creation, competitive research, which are areas absolutely, I think everybody agrees, absolutely crucial for the future of the Mediterranean. And we believe that this supporting initiative like this one is for us absolutely a must, and is a way to create synergies and instruments that are helping to structure a community of research in Mediterranean research, even inside Catalonia, but also with actors outside Catalonia. So we are absolutely pleased with such an initiative like Aula Mediterrània. Actually, from the government of Catalonia, in this season that we hope is going to start very soon, we have the commitment to develop a proper strategic Mediterranean strategy, sorry, that will include, of course, the participation, the focus on research, and will include also cooperation with the academia and research centers, and will develop how we can promote to help things like, for example, promoting more partnerships between north and south of the Mediterranean, helping social sciences also to find its room necessary in days where we talk a lot about technology and not so much about social sciences. Help being more and more often this kind of gatherings and meetings in which we can exchange the perspective, and find out in the first diagnosis that could be able to help together with different actors to make this a reality. So we will, hopefully then, we will be able to continue this kind of cooperation. We'll be able to welcome here you again in proper Aula Mediterrànias and other similar events, or events that they are with the same baseline. Thanks very much. Enjoy this 2-day seminar, and welcome to Catalonia, the ones that they are traveling from abroad. Unless this today is not the sunny day maybe you expected that we normally have. But yes, Lourdes is doing something, talking to someone who is able to fix it.
Sure.
So enjoy, and thanks again.
Thank you, Mr. Sala. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for supporting the project and supporting the seminar. This is really meaningful for us. You started your intervention saying how complicated the situation in the Mediterranean is at this moment. Yes, we are going to discuss about that. Probably we will not find any solution, but we will be talking about Mediterranean modern history, about intercultural communication, about freedom of information, press freedom, freedom of speech, about geopolitics, about migration, about forced marriages, about entrepreneurship, about minorities, about feminism and gender equality particularly. So maybe we do not find solutions, but surely we will find new ideas, fresh ideas, ways forward, and at the end we might find some spots of hope in this complicated Mediterranean. And the fact that you are here also gives us some kind of hope that these ideas might find their way into policy making, which is also important for us. It's not only that research stays in the research field, but also it has some translation into policy making, into policies, and into actions. So this is the best of the environments that we could hope for, and I am very, very positive in the results of this seminar. So with no further ado, I wish you all very rich, fruitful, and intense debates, and hope you enjoy this couple of days in Barcelona and this wonderful building of the Institute of the Studies Catalans. Thank you very much, and let's go to work. Ja us farem arribar també perquè després fem una relatoria amb tot, una mica el resum de tot el que ha sigut. O si necessiteu que algú vagi passant. Bueno, si no, jo crec que
Dic jo... Intentaré anar...
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending our panel. My name is Anna Gil, and I coordinate, together with Paula Santillan Grimm, the Master of Contemporary Arabic Studies, Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona. And today I have the great pleasure and honor to moderate the panel Women in Islam, the Spiritual Revolution, which will be conducted by three outstanding specialists in this topic. Last Wednesday, women's historical strike and massive demonstrations for women's rights during the International Women's Day placed Spain on the front page of a large number of international newspapers. Sorry. From the New York Times to Le Monde, from the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung to the BBC Arabic. Hundreds of thousands of Spanish women struck and demonstrated in the streets of numerous cities of the country to claim freedom, justice, and equality. These demonstrations were also important in 170 other countries, among them Argentina, which last year was the spark that lighted the fuse of the women's strike, but also in the United States, Italy, France, Germany, etc. Feminist civil movements obviously are back to scene and seem to have come to stay. Now, what about Muslim women? Last week, and in fact every year, they are much to the fore in the demonstrations for women's rights here in Spain, but also in many other countries. Many questions arise around them. Which are their specific claims? How do they organize themselves? Who are their ideological references? When does her history begin? Which role do they want to play in Islam from both spiritual, religious, or political point of view? In which ways can Muslim women change their world and the world? I hope our three guests today will help us to answer this and the other questions. Itzea Goicolea Amiano, besides me, from the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, will open the session by offering a general overview of her history and epistemology of Islamic feminism. Her presentation will be followed by that of Shireen Khan, writer, social activist, and founder and leader of the first mosque in Scandinavia, the Mariam Mosque, with female imams. Khan Khan's talk, Women Are the Future of Islam, will circle around the making of the Mariam Mosque, the institutionalization of Islamic feminism, and the question of legitimacy. Finally, our last guest, Refka Smida, feminist activist and researcher, will talk about the role of women in the Arab Spring, considering the rise of Islamic political parties. I suggest gathering the questions at the end of the session. And then let's begin with the first talk. But first, let me introduce a little bit our first guest, Itzea. Itzea Goicolea Amiano is currently a postdoctoral researcher at the Center for Cultural, Literary, and Postcolonial Studies at the SOAS, School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, where she's working on Moroccan multilingual literature within the ERRC research grant, Multilingual Locales and Significant Geographies. Itzea holds a PhD from the Department of History and Civilization at the European University Institute in Florence, Italy, Her dissertation, entitled The Hispano-Moroccan Reencounter, Colonialism, Mimesis, and Power in the Spanish War on Tetuan and its Occupation, is a micro-history of the events that inaugurated modern Spanish colonialism in Morocco. After graduating in translation and interpreting studies, English and Arabic, in 2007, she lived in Egypt for 3 years. She pursued the postgraduate course in specialized translation from Arabic into Spanish in the School of Translators of Toledo, and a master's degree in gender and feminist studies at the University of the Basque Country. Her MA thesis looked at the conversion narrative, the identities, and particularly the agency of Spanish women converts to Islam, and was awarded in 2012 a Maria Gori Honorific Prize. Thank you, Itze, and I give you the floor.
Thank you, Anna. Shall we exchange? Thank you very much, Anna, for your generous presentation. And we actually have been told to stick to 20 minutes, so I think I will need to go a bit fast, and then we can hopefully in the questions expand more on anything that is not clear. I would like to start by clarifying a little bit the title of my presentation. For those who are not familiar with the term "her story," it's a pun with the word "his story," stemming from the feminist critique to mainstream historiography, which has focused actually on men, so that mainstream historiography is really, literally, his story. So her story aims at generating a different historical genealogy that puts at the forefront the experiences of women in history. The epistemology is the way in which we create or approach knowledge. So my proposal is that while we revisit the her story and the epistemology, the theoretical and methodological basis of Islamic feminism, we will be able to, hopefully, I don't know if you can see that. Okay, so the binaries are East versus West, men versus women, homo versus hetero, oppressed versus liberated, thank you. Us, them, theory, practice, secular, religious, so all of this overwhelmingly present binaries, which actually are the foundation of the hierarchical relationship between each of these clusters. So actually I would like to start by making a very basic introduction to what Islam is when we talk about, and further about Islamic feminisms. What is Islam? We have, as it's been mentioned in the introduction, a lot of information, but much of it is really confusing. So I would like to highlight the heterogeneity and the diversity within the Islamic community, which is formed by approximately 1,200 millions in the world. But actually, this map that you have here is only of a map of the countries in which the Muslims are the majority. But we really need to take into account that in these countries there are religious minorities, including, of course, atheists or people with very different relationships to religion, and also the fact that in that thing called the West, including Europe and the US, we have Muslim communities, and also in the past, of course, we have Al-Andalus as one of the main historical evidences that actually this binary between Islam and the West is really problematic if we look back in history, and we have, as I said, Al-Andalus also talking about the Mediterranean experiences in the history of Italy, of Malta, of many other countries that do warn us against this division between the West and Islam. Also, very, very quickly, I just wanted to point out to the fact that Islam is not the Arab world. The Arab world is not, I mean, they are often used as synonyms, but it's quite striking if we actually look at the numbers. Only 1/5 of the Arabs, only 1/5 of the Muslim world is Arab. Arab is also a problematic category, which could be further nuanced. It's also an identitarian category that also bears a wide heterogeneity within it, but that's another story, and of course we want to focus on Islamic feminism, so let's continue. To start with the her story, I wanted to mention one outstanding and complex figure of the thriving feminist milieu that developed in the first half of the 20th century in Egypt. But this is not to say that we don't have expressions that we can sort of relate to what then we would call Islamic feminism before. It's not that I'm proposing that her story of Islamic feminism starts here. We can actually find traces, different traces in history, and of course these traces are also to be read historically. But I'm proposing it, because also as an invitation, if any of you is not really aware of this thriving feminist atmosphere of the beginning of the 20th century in Egypt, I wholeheartedly encourage you to have a look at it. Zainab al-Ghazali started as an activist in the Egyptian Women's Feminist Union in the 20s. In 1920s, in the decade of the 1920s in Egypt, but with the Huda Sha'arawi fighting for against, let's say, patriarchal forms within sort of the colonizers' regime and system, but also against indigenous forms of patriarchy. But then in 1936, she sort of withdrew from the EFU, and she founded a Muslim Women's Association. And of course, she's a very complex historical character, which sometimes, I guess, if most of us read some of her claims, we would consider her to be quite conservative, but she actually refused to become the feminine union of the Muslim Brotherhood, which had been funded in 1928, because as Huda Sha'arawi and the experience with the nationalists, she could really see that women and men fighting for a common cause would often entail that within those groups, patriarchal dynamics be reproduced. What I wanted to point at is her conception of Islam and feminism. She said Islam has provided everything for both men and women. It gave women freedom, economic rights, political rights, social rights, public and private rights. Islam gave women rights in the family granted by no other society. In Islamic society, it is a grave error to speak of the liberation of women. The Muslim woman must study Islam, so she will know that it is Islam that has given her her rights, all her rights. So actually, Zainab al-Ghazali might consider that talking about Islamic feminism is actually redundant, because what she's pointing us is at the fact that Islam is already essentially feminist. Let's go on with her story to further clarify this basis of the theoretical grounds of Islamic feminism. Actually, Islamic feminism as a term, it's considered to have been coined in the 1980s, so some decades after Al-Ghazali, in Iran, which is not an Arab country, it's a Muslim majority country. We are in the 80s, in the aftermath of the Islamic Revolution, and there are some women who gather and actually think, well, why shall we think of Islam and feminism as separate? We can actually start to think about them both within the same paradigm. And as a result of sort of these kind of reflections, the journal Zanan was founded in the 90s, and this was sort of the platform where a lot of these discussions and a lot of the theoretical and methodological starting points were discussed. These two scholars, Ziba bin Husseini and Asfani Najmabadi, have highlighted the fact that this journal was key in the decentralization of the male clergy or the male or religious authority. And they have also pointed at the fact that this journal created a dialogue between both Islamic feminists and secular feminists in Iran. So here is where we also try not to stick to these binaries and these differentiations between, religious feminists and secular ones. But it is true that what distinguishes Islamic feminism, as these two examples from her story have hopefully shown, is that Islam and feminism are thought of within the same paradigm. So it's actually not about strategically using or instrumentalizing a part of religious history or a part of Islamic sources to advance a feminist claim, but it's actually about thinking and developing theoretical and methodological tools within the framework of Islam. Basically, the basic tenet of Islamic feminism as it developed from the 80s is that, as Zainab al-Ghazali was sort of suggesting, is that Islam is essentially bears a message of essential justice that, of course, includes gender justice, and it is the interpretations and the methodologies which have come afterwards that have sort of patriarchalized Islam, if you know what I mean. So it's basically it's culture that is patriarchal and not religion, right? So this is one of the main claims. So in the different dimensions in which we can see the development of Islamic feminism, we find the theological one. So it's about a work of reading the sources of Islam, and especially the Quran, from an anti-patriarchal point of view, and also from a non-heteronormative point of view, as it will follow and as I will later on point out. So one of the pioneers of these liberatory readings, as we have in English, is Asma Barlas, who says the coercive abuse of Islam to oppress people, especially women, is one of the greatest impediments to rereading the Quran today. in such a context, liberatory readings are not just about redefining personal freedoms, they are about challenging entrenched structures of political, patriarchal, state, and sexual power. So she's pointing at the structural and the radical effect and also basis that these liberatory readings have. But there are other dimensions to Islamic feminist also activism, which include, for example, the aim of reforming the family codes, which in Muslim majority countries are enforced. Also, the socio-cultural change, which is aiming at transforming engrounded patriarchal conceptions, and also a spiritual transformation, which, as I was saying in the beginning of this slide, it's not actually peripheral. It's about transforming spirituality, and it's about spiritualizing political feminist transformation. So again, here we have the blurring of some of these binaries as we commonly understand them. But actually, many of the activists have, especially since the 2000s, pointed at the fact that it's not one movement that we're talking about. We should talk about Islamic feminisms because it's both a transnational movement, but it's very locally grounded. So, for example, when I was pointing at the legal dimension, I've mentioned the reform of the family codes or the personal status codes, but in many countries where Islamic feminists are struggling, these codes are not enforced. So it's really like about also the local conditions that every sort of group aims at challenging. I would like to briefly talk about two outstanding Islamic feminists who are important, and I think will hopefully also make an introduction to Shirin's talk afterwards. The first one is Amina Wadud. She's an Afro-American woman who was the first sort of out of the closet imam or leader of the communitarian prayer, which she performed in a church in New York City in 2005. There's a lot of information out there about this, so I won't go into that. What I wanted to mention about Amina Wadud and her work is sort of her methodological heterodoxy, her proposal of gender jihad is about actually challenging classical ways of reading and of interpreting Islamic sources, and especially the Quran. So what Wadud proposes is that gender justice has to be an interpretive filter. It has to be the glasses with which we read the Quran. It's not something, that we can adapt to. I mean, this is very complex. So basically, what I want to highlight is the fact that from sort of the beginnings in which discussions emerge about what the role and the essential nature of Islam and gender issues and the position of women are, we, throughout the 2000s especially, we can see that there are more unorthodox approaches to methodology and also to practice. This second woman that I wanted to talk about, Saidia Sheikh, is from South Africa, and she was the imama or the leader of the communitary prayer in this fourth Congress of Islamic Feminism that took place in Madrid, again, undoing binaries. She, in her khutbah or the sermon, she used a feminine pronoun to refer to Allah instead of the masculine, which is the sort of normative and mainstream. And she also proposed to lead the prayer, not from an advanced position, but from the first row. She said, so what I'm trying to point at is that sort of from proposals of female imamate, we can see feminist forms of leadership in both theory and methodology and practice. So this is a very actually diverse movement. It's transnational, but also locally grounded, as I was saying. And there is also, I wanted to point out to queer Islam and queer readings and non-heteronormative readings and practices of Islam, and I have put some names which I don't know if you can see because I have been playing with the colors for the presentation to be more dynamic, but I think it's been really a failure. So you have Mumin Rahman. Well, you have my email, and I can forward you whatever interests you, because it's very really necessary, I think, that we also get an understanding of queer Islam. And just to end with a funny note, I wanted to also say that it is also Islamic feminists are also very active in the social media, and so they make these memes against sort of the musulmachos, as they call them, who say el feminismo no es necesario en el Islam. Nosotros podemos decirles a las hermanas dónde rezar, qué leer, cómo actuar, qué usar y cuándo opinar. And then we also have the Islamophobe feminists who say deja de actuar, whom the Islamic feminists address and say deja de actuar como si tus opiniones machistas fuesen la verdad sobre el Islam que desconoces. So, yeah, I think this is it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was really amazing, interesting. Thank you very much. I remind you that we are going to leave the questions for the end. So now I'm going to because we have a quarter less in our time. So I'm going to present now, to introduce Shireen Khan. Shireen Khan holds an MA in Sociology of Religion and Philosophy from University of Copenhagen, with specialization in contemporary Islamic activism in the Middle East. She studied Arabic language at Copenhagen University, Cairo, and Damascus University, and held a seminar on Islamic spiritual care at the Faculty of Theology of the Copenhagen University too. She has also graduated in cognitive psychotherapy. She is currently a lecturer, publisher, author, columnist, activist, TV hostess, teacher, public educator, and founder of the NGO The Exit Circle that works against mental violence and social control. She's there responsible for 40 volunteer workers and 7 self-help groups. In 2001, she founded the Association of Critical Muslims that works to promote female Muslim leadership, a separation between religion and politics, and a spiritual approach to Islam. It also advocates for an interpretation of the Quran that is in balance with our times and the societies that we live in, and for the existence of female imams. In 2002, she founded and led the service Face to Face, a counseling service for Muslim women in Denmark, and that same year she was a former candidate for the Danish parliament. In 2013, she founded the Syrian opposition in Denmark, SOD, a Danish political resistance movement in support of the democratic opposition in Syria against the Assad regime. In 2016, she founded the first mosque in Scandinavia, the Mariam Mosque, with female imams, ruled by her to the date. She's the author of 100 papers and of 5 books, the last of which, Women Are the Future of Islam, was published in English in 2018 by Penguin Books. In 2016, she was listed by the BBC as being one of the 100 leading female pioneers in the world, and in 2018, she was included in the Global Influence list of world thought leaders of global influence. And I give the floor, Shireen.
Thank you so much. I just posted my CV. I didn't know that it will be read loud, all of it, sorry. I'm also the mother of 4 children, actually. You didn't mention that. Thank you so much for the invitation to come here today. I'm really honored to be with you. I'm going to take you on a journey. It's a journey of the making of the Mariam Mosque, which is the first mosque with female imams in Scandinavia. But before that, I would like to tell you the story of my upbringing, of my family. My mother, she's from Finland, and she came to Denmark because she couldn't find work as a nurse. She comes from a family of 8 sisters and brothers. My father is a political refugee from Syria. He fled the Hafez al-Assad regime after having been imprisoned and tortured. And he was also an activist writing for both Lebanese and Syrian newspapers. And he came to Denmark. He met my mother. He proposed to her the first day he met her. She said no. They married a month later. They're still married today. And I was brought up with a Christian mother and a Muslim father, between East and West Christianity and Islam. And in my family, we tried to focus on the things that unite us as people. They both have a spiritual approach to their understanding and reading of both the Quran and the New Testament. So in my family, religion was never a cause to any kind of problems. Culture was sometimes, but never religion. I was brought up with a father who thought himself as an Islamic feminist. He is, most of the time. He always quoted Ibn Arabi since I was a little girl. So he said, the perfect man is a woman. And he always served the women in our family. He couldn't eat before everybody was eating. And he was mostly the one who was cooking. And so I started to read Ibn Arabi. And actually, Ibn Arabi, he lived from 1165 until 1240. He's one of the, among Sufi Muslims, one of the big reformators within the Islamic tradition. And Ibn Arabi, he said, among many things, that the perfect man is a woman. So my inspiration for the Islamic feminism that I'm practicing today was basically, I was inspired through the Sufi literature, Ibn Arabi, Rabi al-Adawiyya, and others. And later on, I started to read, as I started at university, and later on I started to read more contemporary Islamic feminist literature, as Amina Wadud, Quran and Women, and Margon Betron, and others. And I was inspired also through their, not only through their readings, but also through the activism of especially Amina Wadud and others. So I did my thesis on Sufism and Islamic activism, and it was back in 1999, and I remember that I had my first vision and my first thoughts about a mosque with female imams. I was in the Abu Nur Mosque in Damascus, and I was listening to the Friday prayer of Sheikh Ahmed Kuftaru, Friday after Friday for 8 months doing my field work. I was also studying the tafsir of the women in the mosque. And I started to think, how would it be if the mufti was a woman or if the imam was a woman? And when I came back to Denmark, I couldn't find a place that I felt that I belonged to. So I created Critical Muslims, which was the first Muslim organization with a female Muslim leadership. It was the first Muslim organization where we invited all Muslims to join our community. Also Ahmadi Muslims who were being banned by the Muslim community in general, not only in Denmark but worldwide, because they have a different interpretation of the coming Messiah. They believe that he already came. So it was also the first Muslim organization that were trying to combining Islam with secularism. We define secularism not as non-religiosity, not as a consequent separation between religion and politics, but as a dialogue between religion and politics. And I was inspired by Abdul Karim Soroush, an Iranian philosopher, and his distinction between religion and religiosity. So it took us 15 years to get where we are today. The making of the Maryam Mosque started with the Femimam movement in 2015, but it wasn't a bright idea that we had 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago. It has been 15 years under its way, and it has been a lot of hard work. The Maryam Mosque is a mosque that is based on Sufism. We have a Sufi-oriented approach to the reading of the Quran. And inspired by Mina Wadud and others, we tried to do a rereading of the Quran with a focus on gender equality. We tried to challenge the patriarchal structures within religious institutions, and we do that very concretely by having Friday prayers. We only have female imams performing the khutbah, the Friday prayer. We do Islamic marriages, divorces. We started an Islamic academy where we teach Arab philosophy, Islamic feminism, Sufism, and other topics. We have recruited some of the leading Muslim scholars in Denmark in order to give lectures at the Islamic Academy. And then we also started an Arabic school. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the question of legitimacy. So, because when you start a mosque with female imams, you get the question, how dare you? Who are you to start a mosque with female imams, and from where do you get your legitimacy? And the question is not a new question. In Denmark, we had the first female priest ordained within the Protestant church in 1948, and they got the same question as we do today. So, and I have to disappoint you. It's very easy to answer the question. Our legitimacy is based exactly on the same as men's legitimacy. But I would like to focus on 3 themes when answering this question, after all. Need, knowledge, and Islamic theology. Let's start with the third thing. What does Islamic theology say about female imams? Is it a reformation? Is it an innovation? Or is it actually a part of our Islamic tradition and theology? The first house mosque in the Islamic civilization was the house mosque of our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And in that house mosque, after the death of the Prophet, 2 women led the prayer for other women. That was Aisha and Salama. And there are also hadith stories about the Prophet entering the house mosque of Waraka. Waraka was very well known for her excellency in reciting the Quran and her knowledge within Islam. And he appointed her as the imama and asked her to lead the prayer for her own community or her household, darha, it says. And where do you find the sources of these hadith stories? There are different sources. One of them is Ibn Sa'd. Ibn Sa'd is a historian from the 8th century from Baghdad. He wrote a biographical lexicon called Kitab al-Tabaqat al-Kabir. It's 8 volumes. 7 volumes are about the men who followed the Prophet in Medina, and the 8th volume is only about the women. We were so lucky that when we started the Maryam Mosque, this source was translated into Danish. So, actually the book has also been translated out into German. It's called The Women in Medina. It's a very good book. You can read it in like one day. And this book goes deep into the source of Ibn Sa'd. So what happened? How come that female imams is to many Muslims a new phenomenon or something that, a story left untold, when this is actually something that was practiced in Medina at the time of the Prophet and after his death? What happened was that after the Prophet died, under the second caliphate, Omar forbade women to lead the prayer for other women. And actually this practice, or Omar's practice or sunnah, has been followed by Muslims hereafter. But 3 out of 4 Islamic schools allow female imams leading the prayer for other women. Some of them find it, they don't recommend it, but it's still accepted. So 3 out of 4 Sunni Islamic school allows it. And it is with a reference to these hadith stories about the Prophet allowing it. Female imam, there is also Tabari, which is a very well-known Muslim scholar. He also had his own school. We used to have more than 100 Islamic schools in the Islamic tradition, but only 5 became canonized, 4 Sunni Islamic schools and 1 Shia. But Tabari, he also allowed female imams actually leading the prayer for both men and women. So you will find a number of Islamic scholars in our Islamic tradition who allows female imams. Female imams is historically also not a new phenomenon. We have female imams in China since the 1820s. They have several women's mosques in China. There are female imams in Somalia, in South Africa, in Canada, in the US. In Los Angeles, they started a mosque with female khatibas. They lead the khutbah on shift every month, and they gather actually 100 to 300 women every month in Los Angeles. There are female imams in Germany. They have very active communities concerning this activism. In Köln, Rabia Müller, she leads the prayer. In Hamburg, Halima Krausen was elected by the Imam Ali mosque community to be one of their female imams. And recently in Berlin also, and in Münster, they have a very active community where they educate female imams. So female imams is not a new phenomenon, but the Mariam Mosque is the first one in Scandinavia. And to many Muslims in Denmark, it's something very, very new. So that was a little bit about Islamic theology. Let's look at the concept of knowledge when it comes to the question of legitimacy. In the Mariam Mosque, you have to have a master at least, or a PhD in Islamic theology, Arab philosophy, or Arabic language or related study in order to be in the process of becoming a female imam in the mosque. But we also want to be flexible, and we distinguish between, because very few women, they like to take the title imam upon them. They prefer to be called a prayer leader, a murshidat, a khatiba, the one who gives the khutbah. So we were actually only 2 women in the mosque who took the title upon us. So in order to be a prayer leader in the Mariam Mosque, if you know how to recite the Quran and you have recited since you were a young girl and you don't have a master, of course you would be welcome to come and lead the prayer in the Mariam Mosque, because being able to recite is also a science. And we like to be both flexible and also focus on the concept of knowledge. So it's not black and white. You also have to attend our Islamic Academy, which consists of 17 courses. You have to take courses in Islamic spiritual care, because being an imam is mostly about servanthood. It's about serving the people who comes to the mosque. And that leads me to the third theme when it comes to the question of legitimacy, and that's the theme of need. Because being an imama is not only about leading the prayer, giving the khutbah, challenging these patriarchal structures, it is actually about serving the people who comes. And we believe that there is a need for female imams in the world. In Denmark, we have young people, elder people who comes to us with all different kinds of topics, sensitive topics. It could be women who are facing a divorce, a birth depression, mental or physical abuse. There are so many sensitive issues where women prefer to speak to a female imam. But we also have men coming with those same issues, so it's not actually a matter of gender. There are two themes that I would like to focus on. The first theme is interfaith marriages, because we realized in the Maria Mosque that many of the young couples who comes to the mosque in order to get the Islamic marriage, the woman is a Muslim and the husband or the other partner is a Christian. And we are actually the first mosque in Denmark who performs or conducts interfaith marriages, and we do that. We believe that the Quran legitimizes interfaith marriages, and we also believe that it's very crucial that the new generation of Muslims are allowed to choose their own partner. It should be evident, the right to choose your own partner. So among the 24 Islamic marriages that I have conducted so far, half of them have been interfaith marriages. Tunisia is the first Muslim country in the world who actually changed the law in December 2017, and now they also allow Muslim women to marry Jews or Christians or non-Muslims. So I hope that it could create a domino effect in the future. The other theme is divorce. Unfortunately, today, Muslim women, am I out of time? No. Okay. Unfortunately, Muslim women today are not allowed to have the Islamic divorce in most of the mosque communities all over the world. In Denmark, there are only 2 mosque communities who allow Muslim women to give the divorce, the Islamic divorce. That's the Maria Mosque and the Danish Islamic Center. So it's actually very difficult for a Muslim woman to get the divorce if the husband refuses. And you might think that why is this a problem? Because we have to follow the Danish law or the European law system. And it's true. But psychologically, religiously, and spiritually, the Islamic marriage is important to Muslims who practice Islam. So some women find themselves trapped in psychological marriages. And we are working in order to standardize the marriage contract that we have constructed, which gives Muslim women the right to divorce. Polygamy is forbidden. The woman has the right over the children along with the man in case of a divorce. And if mental or physical violence occur, the marriage is annulled. So these are 4 premises that we have implemented in our contract. And we also give divorces to women who come and who have been married in other mosque communities and who are unable to get the divorce. What we would like to do is that we would like to invite existing or other Islamic faith communities into the Maria Mosque and to discuss the possibility of changing the contract and giving Muslim women the right to divorce. And then we hope that that could create a domino effect and they could invite other communities into their mosque and persuade them or have a discussion in order to do the same. So how much time do I have left?
You have time if you want to.
Okay. So that was a little bit about the question of legitimacy. When I was conducting the first Friday prayer in the Maria Mosque, that was in August 2016, together with Saliha Maria Feteh. I remember I was preparing myself in my house. I was putting on my galabiya, Syrian galabiya, present from my father, putting on my scarf, and my 4 children were watching me and they knew that this was a very important day. And my youngest daughter, Halima Mariam, She had a visitor. It was one of her friends, a non-Muslim, and she asked her, Halima, what is an imam? And Halima looked at her very proudly, and I never forget the expression in her face when she told her friend that an imam is a woman who's doing great things. So it is actually possible to change a male-dominated concept, the concept of the imam, in a 5-year-old's mind. And this leads me to the topic of changing structures. Sometimes we believe that it's impossible to change a structure because it has been male-dominated for decades. And as Halima Krausen said in one of her articles on female imams, she wrote that things will stay the same until someone comes along and just make that change. So we realized that a small mosque community, our prayer hall can only contain 70 praying women. A small mosque community can actually change something. And the Maria Mosque went international, and this gives us a responsibility because we have a voice internationally as well. And one of our objectives is also to challenge the growing Islamophobia, not only in Denmark, but in Europe and in the rest of the world. We can all see that we have a growing anti-Islamic rhetoric and propaganda. And I believe that by telling new stories or by presenting these untold stories about the great women in the Islamic history and the women of today, we can actually change the concept of Islam, and we can challenge the growing Islamophobia. When I was visiting a church last year, I was invited to give a speech. I remember I attended to the church, and I had my oldest daughter with me, Aisha, and we entered the church and we were going to rehearse just before all the people came. And a man, he knocked the door, and the one who was like presenting me to the church, he looked a little bit afraid because it was a very harsh knocking, and he kept knocking, and I asked him, aren't you going to open the door? And he said, no, it's not necessary. And then the man, he just came in by himself, and he was wearing a red, the red Danish cross on his back, like Superman. He was totally naked, and he was shouting that it was blasphemy to allow a Muslim woman to talk in the church. And I remember that my daughter Aisha, she's 13, she said that why can't you just find yourself a normal job? And I told her it's his democratic right to speak, just close your eyes. And I do believe that we have to acknowledge that the growing Islamophobia is a factor, but it is not impossible to challenge it, and we have to challenge it. And we try to do that in the Maria Mosque by telling these new narratives on Islam. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sherin, for this wonderful talk.
How much?
Okay, I welcome Revka Smida. She's a PhD scholar at the Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona, working on Arabic feminism and intercultural studies. She's an intersectional feminist and an active member of many feminist organizations, such as Real Woman, Real Stories. She has an MA in translation from the University of Geneva and currently is also the teacher of alternative media, a course of the Master of Contemporary Arabic Studies, Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona. Welcome, and you have the floor, Rafka.
First of all, thank you all for having me today and giving me the opportunity to talk about this very important topic. It's the change of social structures regarding women in Arab societies after the Arab Spring. And since the Arab Spring is still going on, I took the example of Egypt and Tunisia because it's considered to be the success story of this movement. So, first of all, I want to start with making a small history about Tunisia and Egypt to know that feminist movement in those countries did not start recently. It started like thousands of years ago. So, first, I think that Paula Gon's quotation is very important here because I think it make it clear. So my mother told me stories all the time, and in all of those stories, she told me who I was supposed to be, whom I came from, and who would follow me. So this quotation will allow us to enter to know a little bit about the history of both countries. So Tunisia's history started with Elisa, as we all know, is Phoenician princess and founder of Carthage. She started this huge civilization like 5,000 years ago, and then she was forced to enter a war with a Berber king, and she decided to suicide. So that symbolizes the end of the first matriarchal kingdom in North Africa. Later on, like 600 years ago, Sophonism, which is also a Carthaginian symbol of resistance against the Roman invader, was forced to lead the movement of war against the Romans and also was defeated and killed. Also, in the 4th century after Christ, of the Common Era, Tunisia was the symbol of the first women who died in belief of their religion. They died because they were Christians, so they were the first female martyrs of Christianity in North Africa. And later on, the Islam came, and the first person who opposed that was Dia, also known as Al-Kahina. She was I don't know it's visible, but she was a warrior and leader of the Amazigh resistance, and she illustrated the struggle of the Berber matriarchy against Arab-Muslim invaders. Later on, she was betrayed by her own people, and Arab-Muslim conquerors won the war and beheaded her. So she signs like the reestablishment of the patriarchy over North Africa, and the spread of Islam marked the restoration of male social power that lasts until today. Later on in the 20th century, on the beginning of the 19th centuries, there were a huge number of pioneering female leaders, such as Bshira bin Murad, Rabia Haddad, and Tawhida bin Sheikh, who established the first Tunisian female union in the beginning of the century and started the feminist movement as we know it today. With the independence, Tunisian state developed a new strategy, which is the feminist state, which means that Bourguiba and later on Ben Ali adopted the ideology of being the state feminist. They take all the decisions in behalf of women, for women. So, and we could summarize it with few facts, that Tahar Haddad wrote Our Women in Islamic Law and Society, that was on the 13th. This book was revolutionary at the time because it challenged all the conception of and all the interpretation of Islam at that time. And yeah, and it was later on adopted in the Code of Personal Status. So, and then Tunisian Feminist Union was created in 1944, and Tunisian state later on established many acts, such as right of the abortion since the 65, and also Tunisian has passed the Law of Sexual Harassment Act in 2004, which was right before the Arab Spring. On the Egyptian side, women also has been there for many, many thousand years, and starting with pharaohs, with the first queen pharaohs of all the time was Queen Hatshepsut, and it was 1478 before Christ, and then Cleopatra, that we all know that she was the female, the pharaoh most intelligent and seductive known. And later on we have many queens, but most of them was Queen Nefertiti, the wife of Akhenaton, who was the first to, with her husband, to change the religious system of Egypt from many deities to one deity. It was the Ra, the god of sun. And then at the beginning of the 20th century, Egypt has witnessed, as all the Arab countries, the movement for the independence of women, of their countries from colonialism, and women has participated actively in those manifestation and protests. And most common, most known one of them is Huda Sha'rawi, which is right here, the one in the middle. And she was also known to be the first woman to take her veil off on 1924 in Egypt, actually in the Tahrir Square. That's why the name Tahrir came from, its liberation. Tahrir Square is actually connected to Huda Sha'rawi. Many other feminist figures of Egypt, as Douria Shafiq, Safiya Zaghloul, Esther Fanous, and of course Nal Saadawi recently. The Egyptian history started also, the history of the Islamic feminist movement recent started with Qasim Amin with the book The Liberation of Women in 1899. And this book was very controversial because it also said that veil is a symbol of slavery. So it was very controversial at that time and was very highly criticized and not accepted by everyone. Also, at the same time, Huda Sha'rawi, as we just spoke about, she founded the Egyptian Feminist Union in 1923. Okay. The Muslim Brotherhood was founded by Hassan al-Banna in 1928. The Muslim Brotherhood has the ideology that women should not participate in any form of political or social life besides being or subjected to their natural domestic roles, which was not very welcomed at that time in Egyptian society, which is not very known, but at that time, Egypt was called Hollywood by the Nile, because Egypt witnessed a huge major industry of movies and actresses and belly dancers, and it was really like if you watch black and white movies about that time in Egypt, you will see it's like Hollywood movies. Later on, women gained the right to suffrage, which means the right to vote, in 1956. But after that time, Egypt has entered the era that defined why women lost a lot of their rights, a lot of their capacities in Egypt. We can start with saying that the 7 Days War in 1967, which was in Israel, Egypt lost, along with Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon. And the Muslim Brotherhood used the excuse that modernity that was adopted by Gamal Abdel Nasser and all other leaders of the region at that time was the reason because they lost the war. They said that Israel won the war because they were the state that believed in God and used the religion as its only source of motivation. So they won. We lost because we did not use our religion, Sharia, and we adopted modernity, so that's the punishment of God. After this war, the Muslim Brotherhood gained a lot of power in society and started attracting more people and more young people to join them. And that's what created a major impact on women's rights in Egypt because it witnessed a huge decline. And then, with the oil impact of the Gulf, it really created, as we say, oil is the enemy of women in the Gulf region, of the Arab world. Because when oil impact reached its peak, those countries that control oil and have a lot of resources, money resources, started to share or to force their religious interpretation, or their interpretation of the religion, or their ways of social dealing with women. They started forcing them on the countries that they are less wealthy than them. And especially Egypt, because at that time, a huge number of Egyptians went to the Gulf to work in the oil industry, and most of the workers did not have any educational background or anything. So they went there and they adopted the knowledge and they adopted the ideology of the Gulf and imported it back to Egypt and started applying it to the society. So that's the history. So why we have women in this position right now in the Arab world. And then the Arab Spring happened. So as Nelson Mandela said, freedom cannot be achieved unless women have been emancipated from all forms of oppression. So the beginning was actually very controversial because everybody knows that the spark that started the Arab Revolution was in Tunisia when Mohamed Bouazizi immolated himself. But the truth is, he did not burn himself, he did not suicide just because he was unable to work or he was with higher degree and no social life. No, the thing is that it wasn't the first time that the police harassed him, but it was the first time that a woman hit him in the streets of Tunisia. She slapped him in the face, actually. This woman, this is Fedia Hamdi, she slapped him while trying to stop him from selling fruits on the street. So he was humiliated, and he was hurt in front of his other male colleagues and other male friends on the street and other male figures on the street in Tunisia. So he went so angry that he burned himself and humiliated himself and started the spark of the revolution. So as you can say, the Tunisian history is really about women and men, or matriarchy or patriarchy. So that's what really sparked the revolution. Then the spread and the presence of women in all forms of the manifestations that went and protests all over the country. So women and men has participated equally and with the same intensity in all the events. And you can say here in the revolution, women did not, or even men did not bring any sign of religious or social demands on the revolution. All what they wanted is just to liberate the old prisoners, the political prisoners, and to start a new regime. The same thing happened in Egypt later on, and the protests spread all over the country, and the demands of the protests on the revolution were only social, nothing about religious equality, gender, or anything. It wasn't the demands of the revolution. Okay. And now we enter the subject. Okay. So in 2011, the first election, democratic election in Tunisia, the Nahda party, which is the Islamic party, won the election. And they started to write the new constitution. So in 2011, the draft of the new constitution was made, and it sparked a lot of protests across Tunisia, because in this draft, the Nahda tried to say that women are complementary to men, which is a new thing that Tunisia never witnessed before, because we always say women are equal to men. Till Nahda came here and said women are complementary to men. So, so this started a huge, massive protest waves all across Tunisia, and it lasted like 4 months till they withdrew this draft. And later on, Tunisia witnessed the rise of Salafism. The Salafism, which is the extremist interpretation of Islam that wasn't exist in Tunisia till that date, until 2012. And this movement was very, very severe and wanted to adopt the Sharia law to stop women from studying, to stop women from doing any work outside the house. And also this movement brought many religious preachers from the Gulf and from Egypt, saying that, for example, the female genital mutilation was a demand by those parties. And of course, here also, Tunisian women did not allow this to happen. And also protests were everywhere and many days on the street, and it was a huge clash. And the 7th March of 2012, it was just one day before the Women's Day. It was in a university in Manouba in Tunisia, in Tunis capital. There was a man, it was like the picture of the presentation, actually. This one. Okay. It was this guy. He was a Salafist. He went on the top of the building of the university, and he tried to take down the banner of Tunisia, the flag of Tunisia, and to insert the Daesh flag. And from the whole university, there was only one girl who stood up to him and went on the roof of the university. Her name was Aula Mediterrània, and she went on the top of on the roof of the university and stood up for him and didn't allow him to take down the flag of Tunisia. And it was a very symbolic moment in Tunisia, because like a man tried to take down the symbol of the state, all the rights and everything that Tunisia stands for, and the only one who stood up against him was a woman. So it was very, very controversial part. Okay, and later in 2013, Tunisian women were divided for the first time in their history, as the rise of the feminine movement in Tunisia, which is a very international feminist movement. And here, the first time, feminist women in Tunisia were divided into old generation and new generation. The old generation stood for the values of traditional respect for the social norms that are adopted by the society, and the feminine, which represents also the new generation of feminism, which they were ready to adopt any form of resistance to pass their ideology. And in 2014, the new constitution was made, and Tunisia lifted all the reserves that they had in CEDAW intervention, which is the Convention Against Any Form of Discrimination Against Women. And it was a huge turn in the history of Tunisia. But in 2017, as she said, the Tunisian president presented 2 new laws into Tunisia, which is very controversial now in the Arab country, in the Arab world in general. The first one is to allow Arab Muslim women, Tunisian women, to marry from non-Muslim men, which is a very controversial act, as you can imagine. And the second one is to allow women to have the same inheritance as men, equally. This was very criticized in the Arab world, to the point that Al-Azhar decided that Tunisia is no longer a Muslim country and withdraw us from the list of Muslim countries. And in 2017, there were it's not a huge accident, but it was a new accident that never witnessed before in the history, actually. It was the Emirates denied the entrance of women, especially Tunisian women, only women, to the country on the 25th of December 2017. This was criticized and was a spark for a new protest in Tunisia that asked that the government make a stand for Tunisian women, because it was like a humiliation. So at that time, the government decided to ban all flights from Emirates that entering the country, which was also sparked huge reactions on the internet with the title "No Woman, No Flag." Yes, and we have only 5 minutes. Okay, so Tunisian constitution brought many rights to Tunisian women, especially equality in rights and duties, economic rights, political rights. The state enhanced women's rights, because here the state took upon him the right to defend, the duty to defend women's rights and to equality in all sectors. So that's Tunisia. In Egypt, the situation was very different, because, as we said, Muslim Brotherhood and Muslim Salafists in Egypt were against that women took any stand or any form of activism outside the house or any kind of function. So when the election came, they divided and they started to create a new discourse, and they went to the mosques and to make seminars and things, saying that women actually are allowed to enter the state. Women are allowed to enter the parliament. We need women just to win the election. So they started to promote that women should be part of their political activism. And women here changed their status from just women who make preaches or humanitarian functions in limited societies or limited number of persons, to act internationally, act nationally, and speak in the name of the nation. But the thing is that when they put their lists of candidates, women were not represented. So you can see a flower that stands for women, yes, and this the symbol of Hizb al-Nur, which is the extremist, the Salafist Brotherhood. And here we can see also a flower, which stands for women. Yes, you can be presented, you can represent yourself, you can be a member of our community and give us your seat in the parliament, but you are not allowed to show your face. And later on, with the fall of Morsi regime and the uprising of the military coup in Egypt, men were, most of them, women also took the role of defenders of the religion, and they were sent to Tahrir Square to make the protests and be the women who beat, who used force, who used as human shields in the manifestation and the protests that were happened in Egypt after the fall of the Muslim government. And also, Egypt has also witnessed few good changes in the aftermath of the Arab Spring, and they started prioritizing gender issues after 2011, and they started passing laws that protect women. And also, we all know that women in Egypt face a lot of harassment and a lot of discrimination and a lot of violence in both private and public spaces. And this picture, actually, it was in Tahrir Square in a manifestation in protest in 2011, where police officers attacked this woman. And for this woman, there was a protest of 10,000 women who went in the street just to reclaim honor for this woman. And also the state used many practices who are humiliating for women, such as virginity tests that were subjected to women in the protests. Also, okay, so, sorry. So just to finish, what made the Tunisian model more successful than the Egyptian one is that the Nahda party accepted the principle of consensus, did not take the power only to itself and imposed the Sharia law and did not ignore the protests and social protests. And also the Nahda benefited from the Egyptian experience of the fall of the Morsi government has greatly affected the performance of the party. So they were scared that the same scenario may happen again in Tunisia, so they changed their position. And also the Nahda division created the need that they take a step back and allow social rights and human rights to pass on in Tunisia, including women's rights. And the civil society in Tunisia played a major role in monitoring the actions of the government and keep an eye on everything. So, to cut it short, that's it.
Thank you very much, Refka, and I'm sorry for having got to you, but we have barely 10 minutes to have some talk, to questions, so I will open the turn for anyone who wants to ask something to the three speakers, or comments or questions.
Thank you very much. My name is Yusra. I'm from Egypt. I'm very proud to witness a very delightful set of women who represent where I come from and who represent my background. So I thank you so much for successfully trying to represent that. I have a set of maybe comments, questions, like a mix of both for the three panelists, and I would be very grateful if you would take them in. For the first presentation, Ms. Amiano, my comment versus question is that I had a feeling that we are introducing a kind of European Islam. I feel it's very distant from the discourse that I come from, and it's the same comment as well for Ms. Shireen Khan. It's that what you're introducing is beautiful, it's amazing, but it's totally disconnected from the discourse of where I come from. The idea of female imams and is beautiful in a sense, and it's acceptable to be in women. But the way it's conveyed in Egypt or in the Arab world is that they will allow women to be an imam over men. So it's the notion is refused initially from the beginning, and it's totally like disregarded, because from what I've heard, you're saying, Ms. Shireen, is that it's an imam for other women in house mosques or in her household, or even, but it's not portrayed in the same way. How as well Ms. Zainab Ghazali was introduced in the first presentation. From what I read from her biography in Days of My Life, she was totally distancing herself from the national movement, from Hoda Sha'rawi. At the beginning, she criticized their performance to a great extent. And when she represented her own movement, she also distanced herself from the Muslim Brotherhood. So to what extent can we say or describe her role as a feminist Islam? And is it appropriate to use the term feminism when discussing the gender roles and the gender performance of women in Muslim community? Because I feel feminism is a very special European concept that represents certain things which are distant from the position of women in Islam and how Islam protects the right of women. So when Zainab Ghazali talks about Islam defending the right of women, I think she was talking about the kind of equality, the kind of right, the kind of justice of how Islam treats women, not the conceptions that are brought with the concept of feminism when we use it. So to what extent, or how can you, what do you suggest to overcome this this challenge? For Miss Shireen Khan, I totally admire, of course, your experience of the mosque in Denmark and for Mariam Mosque, and I do appreciate what you've been doing for the Muslim community there. But there's as well the challenge of to what extent this is in congruence with the scripture. Like you would say, you would hear the discourse in Egypt or in the Gulf countries that this does not. It does not. There's a serious contradictions in that, especially in the marriage contracts, especially in the interfaith marriages. So this is something that would be totally and completely refused, totally and completely like this is not you're not representing Islam, and this is why I would feel more comfortable if I don't know if this is correct or not, but if we would say Muslim feminism, something like that, like I'm because it's not from where I come from the discourse I hear, it's not Islamic feminism. The last, for our last speaker, Ms. Rivka, I totally admire your presentation as well, but I just want to say, it's more of a comment rather than a question. It's not that scary in Egypt anymore. Yeah. It's not. Yeah, yeah. The elections during Hizb al-Nur was very scary. And unfortunately, despite the fact that the Muslim Brotherhood came with a democratic election that have been accepted by everybody, but their performance was very scary as well.
Thank you.
And thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. These are huge questions, and I am going to try to be very short because really, like, I think we could talk about these for days and months, as is the case, actually. I mean, trying to decide what the definition of feminism is, how Eurocentric certain feminist approaches are or have been, or how accurate or suitable it is to define certain people's positions, especially when we talk about historical figures, is really a topic that has been very much discussed. For this particular sort of question, when you said what I suggest to overcome this challenge, for me particularly, what I have found productive is putting whatever figures I'm talking about, be them historical or present, in the center, and instead of imposing our own categories, as often is the case in academia, where we think that we know, and so we define people in this way or in that way, I think what really we need to do is to put these figures in the center and let them define themselves and their agendas, and then try to describe them and relate them in several ways. So So I didn't define, I think I didn't, because I don't really conceive Al-Ghazali as a feminist. I was trying to put her within a historical genealogy in which we can see traces of what we started then from the 80s to define as Islamic feminism. But what I was pointing at was at her conception of women's position and gender relations and rights within Islam. I do think that she was, I think I did say she was a very complex historical figure, so I didn't mean to sort of give an overview of her. My point was really to insert her views on Islam and women within this genealogy. Just very briefly about focusing on a European Islam. I mean, what I was trying to propose is that we can actually undo the binaries, and especially, I mean, not only, but one of the main ones is Islam versus the West. So I talked about Egypt, I talked about Iran, and then I talked about an Afro-American convert into Islam, mainly exerting her activism in the US, and about an imam from South Africa in a Congress on Islamic feminism in Madrid. I mean, I know that realities in the really wide Islamic ummah or community, which is formed by 1,200 millions of people, are really different. And of course, gender conceptions are very, very different as well. But also, I have to say, having been in Egypt for a while and being a Masriya fi qalbi, an Egyptian in my heart, it's also time, I think, to decenter Egypt from the narrative of everything that has to do with Islam and even the Arab world, if you know what I mean. So, yeah, the realities are really, really different. But I'm not aiming at sort of portraying them as, you know, as representative, but as glimpses. Thank you, sorry for taking.
Thank you for your question. When we started the Maria Mosque and it went from a movement into an institution, the community grew larger. And we had to vote about whether it should be Friday prayers only for women or for both men and women. And I was actually in the favor of Friday prayer for both men and women, because all my life, I mean, we were celebrating God, men and women together. And we have a lot of very active men in our board who are very crucial to our movement. And they also want to come for the Friday prayer together with us. But I was actually voted down, so the majority voted for women's mosques, exclusively women's mosques on Friday. But except for Fridays, everyone can come, and after the Friday prayer, men can come. And we also have dhikr and Arabic schools and lots of other activities, the Islamic Academy, where they can attend. But in the beginning, I was really sad about the decision, and I was thinking this is really the devastating thing about democracy, that always the majority gets the right to choose. But later on, I became very happy about the decision, because I realized that when you want to create change, you have to do it very wisely and slowly and with sensitivity. And you have to know the communities that you are a part of, because we would also like to reach out to the new generation of Muslims and to everyone. So I realized that we were actually able to do the real revolutions, like the interfaith marriages and divorces, much easier, because we were an exclusively women's mosque, so we got the blue stamp, because it's actually not controversial at all to have a mosque with female imams leading their prayers for other women. And the Friday prayer, or the Friday khutbah, we send it out to the world through the social media, so anyone can, read and see our khutbahs. we always get the criticism that we are making a reformation, but actually we try to hold on to the fact that we are going back to the roots, we are going back to the sources, and we are rereading the Quran. So to me it's not a reformation, but I don't mind using the term reformation because to me it's something beautiful and good. But our reformation, if I should use the term, is about rereading the text and going back to the sources. We had a visitor from Indonesia. It was the Grand Imam from the third largest mosque in the world. It's the mosque, it's called Istiqlal. And he came with a delegation to the Maria Mosque. He prayed in the mosque and he blessed the mosque, and he made a written document saying that female imams is a blessing and a necessity to the world. And he has 200,000 visitors every Friday. So even though I do not, or we do not seek the acceptance of others, but rather we try to create an alternative to the homeless Muslims who do not feel at home in the existing mosque communities. We try to create a mosque based on Sufism, the spiritual path in Islam. And so even though that we do not seek the acceptance, it's still nice to get the acceptance of the Grand Imam, because when people criticize us, we can say that, oh, not a single Danish male imam have visited our mosque yet, but the Grand Imam, he came from Indonesia, and he also reflects something. Very quickly, when it comes to interfaith marriages and divorces, I mean, Islamic divorce, the woman's right to have the Islamic divorce, it's basic. I mean, even no matter which group you would place yourself in as a Muslim, if you do place yourself in a specific group, whether you have a traditional approach or Islamist approach or more spiritual or modernist approach, and I know these are categories and there are so many ways in between, but no matter which category you place yourself in, the woman's right to divorce is an Islamic right. So we cannot deny it. But it's so interesting that imams and religious and spiritual leaders all over the world, they deny women the basic right to divorce, and we really have to speak up against that and try to change it very slowly within our communities. And interfaith marriages, I know it's very controversial. It's not being practiced by too many, but actually I asked the Grand Imam in Indonesia if he practiced interfaith marriages, and he said that, yes, sometimes he does. So I think it's more widespread than we assume it is, but people, they do not, tell anyone that they're doing it. But so I think that it's also important, even though many people consider it to be controversial, to fight for any person's right to choose their marriage partner, because the family is the fundament for everything in this life. It's so important. And then, in the end, I just wanted to quote Rabia al-Adawiyya. I guess you know her, most of you, but she was one of the female leaders in the world. She died in 801, and she laid the fundament for the spiritual path in Islam. She said, I carry a lamp with fire in one hand and a bottle with water in my other hand. And with these two things I shall set fire to heaven and turn off hellfire, so that the travelers towards God can see the true light. And she said, God, Allah, if I worship you because I long for paradise, close the gates of paradise in front of me. And God, Allah, if I worship you because I fear hellfire, let me burn in hellfire. But if I worship you for the sake of your mercy, may your mercy be upon me. So what is it that she does? She takes the ultimate pair of opposition, heaven and hell, and she deconstructs it. And I do believe that we can learn something from Rabia in our time, Muslims as well as non-Muslims. As you said very importantly, that all these manipulated dichotomies that we people tend to manipulate, I think it's about time to deconstruct them. So we are in the Maria Mosque, we are faithful Muslim believers and secularists at the same time, We do not manipulate dichotomies between East and West, Christians, Muslims. The mosque is named after Maryam because she's a unifying figure, not only because she's a prophet in Islam and she has a whole chapter named after her, but mostly and primarily because she's the unifying figure. Thank you.
I'm afraid I think we have no more time. I think we have no more time to questions, but we have a break time now, a coffee break. So I suggest you continue the discussion outside. Thank you very much for your attendance.